Resuming debate, the honour member for Central Okanagan-Similkameen Nicola. Est-ce qu'on a un point d'ordre?
Do we have a point of order? No more time for questions.
It's always an honor to rise in this place and join in debate on behalf of the good people of Central Okanagan-Similkameen Nicola. Now, I particularly appreciate the speech by the MP for Mégantic-Liard. He's made many good points that I hope to follow on. Madam Speaker, our motion today, and it's a serious one, that given after 9 years, the government has doubled housing costs, taxed food, punished work, unleashed crime, and is the most centralizing government in Canadian history, the House has lost confidence in the government and offers Canadians the option to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Now, I have to say, though, I did not know about this particular opposition motion until recently. I came to this topic well prepared today. Back home in my riding, I write a weekly MP report to my constituents, as I'm certain many others in this place do as well. For the past few weeks, I wrote extensively about this particular topic, as I knew, we all knew, it would be coming up in this place. Back on September 4th, I, of course, wrote about the leader of the NDP tearing up his agreement with this Liberal government. When it came to answering the obvious question on what this would mean that we would have an election, here's what I wrote. And I quote, "The NDP can, and I suspect likely will, continue to vote with the Liberal government." Well, it's almost like I'm psychic, Madam Speaker. I mean, who could have possibly predicted that the NDP leader would continue to stand with this Liberal government after this great theatrical performance of tearing up the agreement? Now, when I was asked why did I think the NDP leader staged this theatrical performance, here's what I wrote in response, and I quote, "In my view, the leader of the NDP is responding to criticism for what has been his current NDP strategy of bitterly condemning and complaining about things Liberals do outside the House of Commons that the NDP fully supports when inside the House of Commons." Once again, an almost psychic reading of this NDP leader. Now, often I like to ask my local citizens a question at the conclusion of my reports, and the following week I asked the question, and I quote, "If given the chance to participate in a non-confidence vote on this Liberal government, would you opt for election now or prefer to wait until October 2025? I suspect it will not surprise any member of this place to learn an overwhelming number of Canadians want a carbon tax election, and they want it now. I mean, the fact that even the leader of the NDP says he no longer stands with the carbon tax speaks volumes. Now, I mention these things, Madam Speaker, because I now can say with complete and total certainty the good people I represent want a carbon tax election. So let me bring back to the leader of the NDP. Now imagine for a moment the leader of the NDP broadcasts his own show, his own radio talk show. If you ever want just to know how incompetent and badly performing this Liberal government is, you could tune into the NDP leader's AM radio show, as it would be 24/7 telling you just how bad this Liberal government is. I mean, this is the same Liberal government who, according to the NDP leader, and I will quote here, "The fact is the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people," end quote. Now, I mean, when it comes to corporate greed, the leader of the NDP is clear that this government is the enabler of corporate greed. But here's the problem, Madam Speaker. Let's for a moment surmise that everything the NDP leader says is true. And when it comes to the Liberal government incompetence, he's not really that far off. But here's the thing. Who is the greatest enabler of this Liberal government? It is, wait for it, the leader of the NDP. Wow. I know, hard to believe, right? Now, how can someone say a Liberal government that is that incompetent and yet they still support the Liberal government every single day? I mean, once again, this week we learned that after all of these great theatrics, the leader of the NDP still stands with the Liberals. It is such a totally nonsensical situation. Yes, I think you are the worst government ever and do not deserve to be re-elected whatsoever, but I will do everything in my power to keep you elected. It literally makes no sense to anyone. And yet, this is a wash, rinse, and repeat tactic for the NDP. And of course, Madam Speaker, joining in this now is the Bloc Québécois. Now, to some extent, I can sort of see the situation from the NDP's perspective. After many years of blindly supporting this Liberal government, no matter what, and many people now view the NDP and Liberals as largely one and the same. I have many seniors in my riding. When I knock on the doors, longtime NDP supporters tell me that voting NDP used to mean something, and that this NDP has lost its way. Now, getting back to the Bloc, to see the Bloc suddenly standing with the Prime Minister, I did not fully expect that. After all, this Liberal government has failed to deliver for the people of Quebec just as badly as it has for the citizens in every other province and territory. This Liberal government has literally turned failure into an art form. Immigration, foreign interference in our democratic process, softwood lumber, the now $60 million gun so-called buyback program that has not bought a single firearm. Crime is up massively, corruption in our federal program and for contracting, complete fiscal mismanagement, our military, foreign policy. I mean, literally everywhere you look, so much failure. And that's not good for our provinces or our territories. It is not good for Canada. Worse yet, the Bloc is now supporting a Liberal NDP coalition that has doubled housing costs, taxed food, punished work, unleashed crime. We know that the House Leader for the Bloc has said, and I'm quoting it here, we've seen an excessive centralization, never before seen in history. This government, which has difficulty managing its own missions, was starting to get its hands into the jurisdiction of Quebec and the provinces. End quote. One quick note I'd like to share with the Bloc members of this place. I have a small value-added small business business in my riding who sources his raw goods from two places. One of those places happens to be from Quebec. Now, every time the carbon tax increases, the shipping bill from the trucking company he uses to get that raw supply from Quebec becomes more expensive. They literally send out a note making it clear that they're increasing their shipping rates because of the carbon tax. And after the next carbon tax increase, it will cost more. It will be more cost effective to get those raw goods from outside of Canada. What a shame. Those jurisdictions that do not have carbon taxes and the trucking costs from the border of the BC interior are much cheaper than compared from Quebec. He says the carbon tax makes him feel punished from trying to use Quebec-sourced goods, or for that matter, from any other Canadian province. Now, does the Bloc think that's good for Canada? Why does the Bloc want to become the new NDP and stand with this Liberal government? It's so bizarre, Madam Speaker. Every Bloc member of this place will have to answer to their own constituents why the Bloc is now working for a Prime Minister instead of working for them. Now, before I close, Madam Speaker, I have to come back to something the leader of the NDP has said recently. And he said, and I quote, "It is the people's time," end quote. I could not agree with him more on this. So why not give the people an election so that people can be heard? Because it is the people who we work for. I don't know about the Bloc, the NDP, and the Liberals, but I work for the people who sent me here. I don't work for this Prime Minister. And every time you vote against a confidence motion, you are voting against the people and giving them a say on this Liberal government. Madam Speaker, it is well past time to give the people their say and to have a carbon tax election. It is the people's time. I, for one, dare the NDP leader to stand with his own words for a change instead of standing for the Liberals. Now, Canadians want a government that will axe the tax, that will build the homes, that will fix the budget and stop the crime, Madam Speaker. Canada's common sense Conservatives are ready to do that, Madam Speaker, for them. We believe that government should serve the people, not the other way around. So I ask my friends from throughout all this place to start putting the pressure on this government and to vote in support of this motion. Madam Speaker, I do hope that the voices of Canadians will be heard, not just through my words, but through our collective voice as a parliament. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for Glengarry Prescott.
Madam Speaker, imagine a member of Parliament who spent 20 years of his life in this place, and they repeat slogans, build the homes, but the only plan that he can come up with is a NIMBYism line for people to call for not in my backyard. I'm just wondering, how many homes is that going to build? And the point is, Madam Speaker, if you want to go into an election, you got to show Canadians a plan. 5 lines is not a plan. So I'm asking him, a phone line, how many homes is that going to build for Canadians?
The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Madam Speaker, I will remind the member in 2015 when the then third-party leader presented his complete platform. It was during the election campaign at a press conference where he couldn't actually debate with other parliamentarians. We've been putting out exactly the direction that we believe that this government should be going in. And you know what, Madam Speaker? He talks about building homes. For my own, in my own home province, in Kelowna proper, they've signed an agreement for the so-called housing accelerator. Madam Speaker, I've looked through the plan that this Liberal government and this housing minister has championed. Madam Speaker, there is not one reference to building a home. It says you can build bike lanes with it. It says you can build sewage or sewer facilities to plug into housing, or even a bridge. Madam Speaker, they're essentially giving more money to the people that are not actually building the homes. Housing starts in BC are down 34%. Madam Speaker, how can this member stand up and say that they have any moral authority on housing?
Comments, l'honorable député.
The honourable member for... I always have a hard time with Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't know if I want to congratulate my colleague on his speech, but I'd like to come back to some of the things he said in it, because he said two things in his speech, well, other things, but two things that really caught my attention. One about the carbon tax, and the other was that he criticized the Bloc for propping up the government. So the Bloc does not prop up the government. We simply haven't brought the government down. There's a distinction to be made between those two things. The government is on life support, and there's a sense that there'll be elections in the short term. But what we're trying to do is make sure that there are benefits to Quebecers, and that is an increase in the OAS for 65 to 74-year-olds. So perhaps I wonder what my colleague thinks about the idea of making gains for seniors by subsidizing the oil patch a little less.
This is the most centralizing government in Canadian history. C11 has given more power to the CRTC over what is considered to be Canadian. And, Madam Speaker, that also includes contact from Quebecers. He has essentially voted to give more power to Ottawa, to that bureaucracy, over people's online expression. Madam Speaker, this Prime Minister has doubled the Canadian debt. That means Quebecers will have to put more money each and every year to service that debt to Ottawa instead of to their own interests. Madam Speaker, he talks about a bill that the Bloc Québécois has put forward in regards to seniors, Madam Speaker. You know what? Under this Prime Minister, he's changed the way the Senate works. They can get a royal recommendation from the Minister of Finance, but can they get it through the Senate? I don't think so, Madam Speaker. It may not even get it. It's like the equivalent of Jack and the Beanstalk, Madam Speaker. They're asking for some magic beans, and that's what the Liberal government will offer them, but they won't grow anything except bigger Ottawa.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona, a brief question.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And, you know, one of the things that the member said in his speech was that this is the worst government. The Liberal government is the worst government we've seen. And listen, there's lots of challenges. I'm going to be speaking about my challenges with the Liberal government later on today. But from my perspective, the worst government that this country's ever had was, in fact, the Harper Conservative government that cut supports for women, cut supports for health care, cut supports that Canadians need. Now, what he's saying as well is that Canadians overwhelmingly want a carbon tax election. But in fact, polling that came out on September 6th to 8th says that in fact, the majority of Canadians don't want a carbon tax election. How does he square that circle?
Honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola, a brief answer, please.
Madam Speaker, she's making the point. Her leader said it's the people's time. Her leader rips up an agreement and says how terrible this government, and so she does here. But when it comes time to put rubber to the road, they stand with this Liberal government and this Liberal Prime Minister. Madam Speaker, my constituents have said, get me off this track that this government has put us on. And the NDP, Madam Speaker, is certainly part of the problem. It is definitely not the solution. A common sense Conservative Party leading this country is.
And I just want to remind members they've had an opportunity to ask a question. If they have other questions or comments to make, they should wait until the proper time.